Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the stream. Hope you're all well. And let's see who we have with us in the chat. Okay, we have a question here. I'll get to that in a minute. Yes, it does. Assalamu alaikum. Abdul Nasir. And Assalamu alaikum. Sajos. I think I actually just saw you backstage, but then you disappeared. Hopefully you can come back on. Hey, I have a Geralt of Rivia here. A Witcher, a White Wolf. Salam and Adriana. Good to have you. All right, so it's been a while since we've done one of these open mic question and answer formats. Just leaving it open for anybody to come on and ask whatever they want. Usually some do that anyway, but others have, messaged me saying that they feel a bit shy in terms of coming onto a stream which has a topic which I've presented on and asking questions. So that's one of the reasons why I started doing these open mic question and answer sessions. It's been a while since we've done one of these. The last one, I think it was stream number 76 or something. It's been a while. And I know there's a few people who want to message me a couple of times yesterday and day before yesterday, and even a few days before that, asking when I'm going to have a stream open because they would like to talk. So I'm going to leave this open for up to an hour, even if nobody comes on. Feel free to come in and pop out as you like. If you have some questions to put on and you don't want to come on to the actual live stream, you can just put them in the chat and we'll get around to them. Yes, okay, yes. That is you. Sajos, good. And yes, and you'll come back on. Okay, great. All right, okay, so there's a nice question over here, which is something which needs to be looked at. Not this one, sorry, that's me. This one. So 607. Anyway, I honestly think it needs to be looked at more. It does that. The idea of mujrimeen, I mean, the first person who sort of got me to notice this was Hassan al-Maliki. He's the one who mentioned that that the word ijram and mujrimeen in the Quran doesn't mean, as we usually think of it now in Arabic, that it means criminals. Like, for example, somebody who does murder or fraud or these kind of sort of like physical crimes, assaults, rapes. Now we'd sort of call this a person like that mujrim. Okay, almost directly translated into English as criminal. But he noticed, and I haven't looked through this totally myself, but I have had glimpses of it as I've been, whenever I've been just reading through the Quran, I notice it. But I do need to look at it deeply to see if I agree with that or not. Typically, I do agree with a lot of what Hassan al-Maliki says. He's very thorough. But there are some things which I haven't in the past. So it would be nice to look at this myself. But the idea comes from it. I mean, I've got a very good example of that in the part 2 reaction video to Jonathan Brown about the Quran being the hadith or the sunnah being more powerful than the Quran. In the part where I talk about Ghadir Khum and what happened after that. So one of the of course, this goes into history, which you don't need as much. But the whole incident of Ghadir Khum, where the prophet basically set up Ali as the next caliph, and he told the ummah to sort of like hold on to not the Quran and Sunnah, but the Quran and Ahlul Bayt. And the reason for that was because he had been shown that his Ahlul Bayt would not deviate from the Quran. That's the crux of the matter. which is something which is sidelined by the Shia. I mean, the Shia take, just the part of, when kuntu mawlahu fa Ali mawla, whoever I'm his master, then Ali is his master, and they just run with that, pretty much ignoring that, it's part of a lengthy khutbah, right? And most of it centered around the Qur'an, right? And the Ahlul Bayt as being the second weighty thing, but there's two weighty things the hadith says. One of them is much more weighted than the other. What is that one thing which is much more weighty? The Qur'an, right? The Qur'an is much more weighty. And the reason why the second weight is there, the Ahlul Bayt, he said because God had informed him they will not deviate from the Qur'an. Now it's very interesting when you look at it in this way. The verse which talks about deviation from the Qur'an, what is that? It's the famous verse, وَقَالَ الرَّسُولُ يَا رَبِّ إِنَّ قَوْمِ اتَّخَذُوا هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ مَهْجُورًا. This verse over here. This out of the way. Okay, and the messenger will say, "Oh my Lord, right? My people have abandoned this Quran." Literally, mahjura have left it in hijrah, right? And when you do hijrah, immigration, you're going from one thing to something else. You're immigrating away from it. So it's just about deserting it and leaving it. You're moving away from it to something else. What are you moving away from? To something? You're moving away from the hadiths, the riwayat, and these sort of things. The point is, the Quran has been abandoned for something else. Okay, it's been deserted for something else, right? So this is that famous verse where, most people who listen to this channel are aware of this, right? And the Prophet on the Day of Judgment will his one complaint will be that his people abandon this Quran, right? And what does the next verse say? And the next verse says, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا لِكُلِّ نَبِيٍّ عَدُوًّا مِنَ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. And thus have we appointed or have made for every prophet an enemy or enemies from among the mujrimeen, from among the quote-unquote criminals, right? The sinners, or and then it says, وَكَفَى بِرَبِّكَ هَادِيًا وَنَصِيرًا. And your Lord is sufficient as a guide, right, and a helper. Okay, now so what's happening here is that the people who are going to be enemies of the Prophet in terms of taking people away from the Quran, they are being called mujrimeen. They are being called, quote unquote criminals. But of course, the action of taking people away from the Quran isn't like murder, isn't these sort of things, right? It's more an intellectual criminality. It's more about deception. It's more about changing the truth, hiding it. Okay, these sort of things. And you can have an analogy from what we have now. Okay, right now, there, in many ways, you can see some of the biggest criminals to be the people who are controlling the narrative, controlling the information, hiding the truth. Right? These are huge criminals. I was just listening. I think it was today or maybe yesterday, but it was some a Jewish man, right, Zionist. He said, he's talking about how he went from being completely Zionist to being pro Palestine, and understanding what the criminality of Israel. And the way he did it, he was basically praising Norman Finkelstein's book, right, which is a very heavy book. It's a very difficult book. I mean, when he wrote it, he said, "I wrote it. It's not a labor of love. It wasn't a labor of love. It was a labor of hate, of anger, right? Because it was just so difficult to do, right?" But he was saying how what he was doing. He decided when he wanted to actually learn more about this, not just be an ignorant Zionist, but he wanted to actually have all of the information. He decided, I'm going to read up on all the literature on it, but I'm only going to read things from Jewish authors. He just decided that, okay, which is a very bad way to do it. I see you, Strawberry, backstage. I'll bring you on in a minute. Let me just send that. No, I'm not sure if somebody, when they're backstage, they can see the messages. Salam, let me just type up. Well, actually, let me just bring her on. I'm thinking of her, but maybe not her, and then I can continue saying what I was saying. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brother. How are you?
Good, I'm good. Alaikum assalam. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. came to
Excellent.
this after a very long time. Do you remember me?
I think I do. Yes. Yes, actually, I do. Yes, I
Okay.
remember. Yes.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions, and today the first question I have is like, there is like allegedly, I mean, there is a lot of anthropomorphism in the Quran. Like, the Quran
Hmm.
talks about the arsh, it talks about
Hmm.
um, like the hand of God and all these sort of things. But
Hmm.
I want to know like, what is your interpretation of arsh and then kursi as well?
Hmm. Hmm. All right. Okay. Let me get to that. I just want to finish what I was saying. I don't know, but quick question: while you're backstage, can you actually hear what I was saying before, or you have to wait until I add you? Like, were you listening to what I was just
I
saying just
was
before?
listening. I was
All right.
listening to
Okay.
everything you were saying
All
in this
right. All right.
backstage.
Good. 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 All right. Let me get to that in a minute. So I was just saying that, and I was listening. We were just talking about this word mujrimeen in the Quran. So anyway, this Zionist guy, he started to go through the literature and he read Norman Finkelstein's book, and he would check the sources, and it was very rigorously done, backed up, with documents and papers from Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and all of that, right? And he was just mentioning how the process that he went through at first, shock, and then sort of like disbelief, and then he started to feel real anger and sadness. But that point where you start to feel very angry and betrayed, and these at those who have been lying to you and hiding the truth. It's you can look at these when you're in that moment. You can really look at these people as real criminals. That they've really done a number on you in terms of distorting truths and changing, taking hold of the narrative to portray what they want. So these kind of things, they're quite criminal. Now we might think of mainstream media, how it's very criminal in many ways. How, for example, whenever there's like you said, I don't know if anybody sees these posts where they show, for example, when a Israeli dies, right? The headline on the BBC, for example, it mentions who did it, right? It mentions that they've died, and it mentions everything is done properly. But when it's a Palestinian died, it's as if it's always done in the passive voice, as if you don't know who did it, right? They just died as if they died suddenly. And so that's another example of that. That's ijram, right? That's ijram from this perspective, in terms of this sort of intellectual or more cultural, um, um, criminality, right? Um, but it is something which needs to be looked into more, right? But it is true when you start to, if you just next time you're reading through the Quran and you see mujrim or mujrimeen, you start to notice, yes, it does seem to be linked a lot more with these kind of things, right? It's even included in the verse about inventing a lie against God, right? Fine, let me just pull out that verse as well. So in that case, inventing a lie upon God is the same, is as a type of ijram as well. Yeah, so it's in Surah Al-Sajda, verse 32. Let me pull that up. Sajda, verse 32. Oh, sorry, 22. Sajda is Surah 22. If I remember correctly, yes. Okay, so here's another example of that. And the verse says, وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ ذِكْرَ بِآيَاتِهِ بِآيَاتِ رَبِّهِ ثُمَّ عَنْهَا. Okay, so no, that's a different one, right? This one's saying, because these are linked, those who invent a lie upon God, they're linked to this because it's all one category. You'll see in the Quran this rhetorical question a number of times: who is more unjust than the one who? And then there's a number of different formats that falls into. The reason why that's being given that way is because it's one group. Okay, these are the same people who invent a lie upon God, right? In this case, this is another aspect of them, which is when they are reminded of their Lord, they turn away from it, right? So, and again, these people are being called mujrimeen, right? Inna min al mujrimina muntaqimun. We are going to take vengeance upon the mujrimeen. All right, okay, yeah. So when it comes to sorry, what was your name again? I mean, unless you want me to just call you Strawberry.
Strawberry,
Is that
yes.
fine? That's fine. All right, yeah. So when it comes to these, the verses about, Allah's hand and these sort of things, the way I look at these, and the same way, sort of like how I look at the verses where people claim that they have scientific miracles, and in the same vein, you have the opposite where they will claim scientific errors, right? I look at the verse as total, right? What is the verse trying to say? Is a verse which mentions Allah's hand trying to tell you that Allah has hands? No, obviously not, right? None of those verses are like that, right? They are just telling you, it's being used metaphorically, basically. I mean, it's what the Ash'aris would say for, in their dogmas, and what the Shia would say, and the Ismailis, and most of the Muslims. The only ones who have this weird thing where basically they will tell you God has, attribute of a hand and a face and a this and a shin and everything, right? And then at the end of it, they say, but not like us. Well, it's a ridiculous thing to do, right? You say that God has a face. He has, and one of the ways that they're just anthropomorphists, that they're doing tashbih, is by their saying two eyes, because there is not one source anywhere which says two eyes. There's no hadith which says two eyes, no verse which says two eyes, right? There's verse which says eye, and another one which says eyes, the multiple, right? So the way because they decided it's two eyes, it tells you automatically that what they're doing is tashbih. What they're doing is this anthropomorphic view of God, right? Because there's no place for it, doesn't come from here, but they say two eyes because we have two eyes, right? So he has a face, two eyes, a shin, a side, right? Two hands, two right hands. What else do they say? A bunch of things, right? Even in some of the really crazy books from before would say that he has everything except private parts, right? That's the only thing that he doesn't have, right? Everything else is there. And so they say that they list these things for you, right? And then they say, but not like us, not like, well, what is that? That's like, it's like somebody standing at the edge of a cliff, right? And you push him off, and while he's falling down, right, you throw a rope down for him to catch on, right? And say, oh, he's not, but not like us. No, you don't. You've taken him all the way there. There's no, you can't take somebody to that edge, push them over, and then try to catch them, right? With a with a thread of hair or something. So those verses, if I want to pull out a verse now so we can actually look at it.
The ones about the Arsh specifically, because the Arsh has been repeated in the Quran many times. So I want to know, what is the significance of it, and what is the Arsh literally means throne. So what is the meaning of that?
So it's basically saying that God has authority. That's what it comes down to, right? Whenever you see Arsh just represents authority, right? The throne, like the final the person who has ultimate authority is God, right? There's no throne above his throne, right? He's the King of Kings, right? The King of Kings. Because there's many kings have thrones, right? Even in the olden days where you have big empires, right? Empires used to sometimes consist of smaller kingdoms, and then you'd have the high king above them, right? In Britain, it used to be that way as well. When you look at the King Arthur days of legends and stuff like that, King Arthur was the High King. He was called, right? Why High King? Because there were other kings, right? Different kings in different parts of the British Isles, right? And he united them all and became the High King, right? So he has the Arsh, right? The throne, right? So it just means that it's a representation of authority. Right? There's no actual throne that God sits on or anything, right? And even, but there is a verse, for example, which talks about, that there could actually be actual physical, as these things go, right? And in the same way that angels are physical, right? Arsh, right? Because it talks, for example, in one of the verses, it talks about how in the Day of Judgment, you will see the angels, حافين من حول العرش, sort of like bunched up around the arsh, right? And so that gives you an impression that it's actual thing, wasi'a kursi, that it's actual thing. And if it is, then again, it will be just sort of like a creation for us physical beings to be able to see a manifestation of God's might, right? If you see, the greatest throne that there is, right? It's a representation. It doesn't mean God sits on it or anything like that, right? It'll be like sort of like almost like an empty, maybe like an empty thing. So almost like the Kaaba, right? And the Kaaba is there. We call it the house of God, right? And God doesn't reside in it, right? But it's there as a representation for us, right? You see the mu'minin hafina min hawli al-Kaaba, right? Doing tawaf around the Kaaba, right? It's a representation. When we do tawaf around the Kaaba, right? It's a representation that we do tawaf around, that we are, we want to be in God's orbit, right? It's dedication to Him, right? That God is the center for us, right? It's the same thing, right? But the Kaaba itself is not actually the house of God. It doesn't reside in there. Doesn't go. And the same thing when it comes to the Arsh.
Okay, and then what about the kursi then?
The kursi, so kursi only comes up once, right? And it seems that and when it comes to kursi, they have it in it's the same sort of like the I need to look at it more, but kursi, when it came to the Arabs of the time, it was another word basically for arsh, right? But it was more like for judgment, right? It's like the judge's chair, right? Whereas a throne is more like the authority figure and this sort of thing. But when it comes to kursi, it's like the judgment seat of some, when you come before, when a king would have those sort of like sessions where they sit in judgment, right? It will be sort of called the kursi. Yeah, he'd be like jealous ala kursi. He sat on his chair. So it's like the judgment seat chair, right? So that's why it comes. I think that's where it comes in Ayatul Kursi, where it talks a bit about wasi'a kursiyuhu as-samawati wal ard, right? His kursi, expands the heavens and the earth, right? That's his judgment, right? He sits in judgment over everything, right? So it's that kind of way. But yeah, they used to talk about it in that kind of way, right? They also used to use sarir, right? In the later dynasties, right? Sometimes they talk about the sarir, right? Which is sort of like a bench, right? Which some monarchs used to use as well, right? That there'd be a bench where they would they'd sit on a bench, and that would be like the judgment seat as well, right? It would be a weird thing. I think they had that in the what's it called? The image that comes to mind now, because just came to mind, is because I read those books, the one that got made into the TV show, the famous one, Song of Ice and Fire, right? The Game of Thrones, right? Those. So I've read those books, right? And when you have that, what's her name? The blonde woman, Daenerys.
I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that show.
Yeah. But anyway, you have like the main woman there, and she becomes like a monarch. Yeah. No, I'm talking about the books here. I don't know if they do this in the show, but they have her in seating in judgment over the city that she decides to take over, and she does that from a bench. Like there's a bench sat there, right? And so the Arabs used to talk about that as well. They used to use sarir, right? Sarir as like a bench. Even though sarir now for us, for example, like curriculi Arabic now, sarir is like a bed, right? It's a bed. But before would be like sort of like this bench that the ruler would sit on, right, and pass judgments from that, right. So that was used, but also kursi was used a lot, right. The kursi, the judgment chair, right, to sit in judgment over somebody, right.
Okay.
So that's how I would see kursi, which is what I mean. That's why it says again, wasi'a kursiyuhu as-samawati wal ard, right. His kursi expands over the heavens and the earth, right? That means his authority of judgment, right? Sits in judgment, right? It says for him is what is before there, in front of them, and what is behind them, right? Which is, again, if you're going to give judgment, right, you need the knowledge of what is before and in front, right?
Yeah.
So you have that. So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. I also wanted to ask you like about context when it comes to interpreting the Quran. What I mean by that is like there are certain surahs and there are certain verses. Like when you read them, like you need context from the hadith, or at least that's how I've been trained to think. So it's
Mm.
like for example, there's Surah Al-Mujadila. Like you
Yeah.
won't know what it's about until you refer to the hadith, right?
Mm.
Or how do we interpret kind of those verses? There's surahs, there's Surah Anfal, there's Surah Tawbah.
Mm.
There are verses in the Quran that are referring to things that are happening in the Prophet's life.
Yeah.
So how do we kind of, without hadith, how do we interpret those passages?
Well, I mean, I'm not somebody who rejects all hadiths or takes away all of the history from a thing. I think I think it's a foolhardy thing. I mean, I think it's a lazy thing, to be honest, but it's a safe thing to do. It's also a very safe thing to do, right? To sort of I'm not going to look at any of the hadiths. I'm just going to look at the Quran. That's perfectly legitimate and it's perfectly safe and it's fine, right? But you can. I think it's obviously that some of the things, some of the facts of the history have survived, right? Um, what I would push back on what you said, okay, yes, you won't, you won't with the Quran alone, you won't find the details that sort of like that sort of tickle your fancy, the sort of like um, the things which offer you your sort of for your curiosity, right? But you will get from it exactly the point of the lesson of the verses, right? That won't be lost, right? I
Okay.
mean, if you were to look at it again, all right, imagine you look at the verses without the context, and you look at the verses again with those contexts, right? With the hadith, so if you have all of the correct information, right? What changes in the lesson that you get from them? Nothing, right? You come away with the same basic lesson of what the verses are intending to do, right? What the Quran does, it takes away a lot of the sort of like the things that which you are not necessary, right? It strips away a lot of the fat and just gives you enough information to be able to get the point of guidance across, right? The point of guidance
Oh,
across. And then there are verses, of course, which are definitely just they're in that context there. Now we can learn from that, like we learn from what happened at the time and what was going on at the time, and again the lessons which we get from the surah, we can take information from that, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean it applies, right? So put it this way: if you were there at the time, right, and you were like you didn't have all of them. I mean, most people don't have all of the information anyway, right? If you were just a normal common, I don't know, soldier in the army of the Prophet, or one of the just normal person, the majority of the people in the time of the Prophet weren't, they didn't have all of the information as well, right? They just
mm,
had, you know, general ideas of what was going on. They didn't know all of the details. So if you were to put yourself in that position, you were there. Again, those verses as they are, right? They would give you more than enough guidance for the point that's being given, right? So, for example, I mean, take the like you mentioned, sort of Toba, right?
yeah,
I
Surah
would like to,
Tawbah.
yeah, I would like to give an actual example so that it's easier to see, right?
Maybe Surah Mujadila.
Surah Mujadala. Okay, let's go for Al Mujadala. What was again Surah 60? Al Mujadala is 60.
It's in the 27th juz, I think, or
Yeah,
28th.
it's Al Mumtahina Al Mujadala. It's 58. Let's go 58. Yeah, so here, so for example, look at this verse, right? So it says, قد سمع الله قول التي تجادلك في زوجها وتشتكي إلى الله والله يسمع تحاوركما إن الله سميع بصير. So God has certainly heard, He certainly heard the one who sort of argues with you, and remember she's arguing with the Prophet, right, concerning her husband, and she complains to Allah, right? Now, knowing the rest of the context around that, all right, doesn't that's not gonna not gonna remove the what we're being shown over here, okay? It's not going to be removed, not going to take away what is being shown here, right? And what we've been shown here, as it is, it can apply to many situations, right? Now, if this verse were to actually give the specifics of it, right, what would happen? People would say, right, this verse is about only this specific thing, right? People would say, okay, this is just about a woman when she complains about her husband about, you know, such and such a thing about thing X, right? And then if somebody wants to then apply that verse about thing Y or something else, you'd have somebody argue against that, say, no, this verse is about that. No, so it's kept general because these are things which happen generally, right? It's about a woman complaining about her husband, right? In a situation where you see in the rest of the verses where a lot of power wasn't given to women, right? The complaints weren't being heard as much, right? But here Allah is hearing her complaint, right? It was in a society where the complaints of women weren't given much thought, weren't given much weight. And here Allah is saying, no, I'm hearing it, right? I'm listening to it, right? So what we're getting here is, it's above it transcends sort of her own situation, whatever it was, whatever the context was there. What we're getting from this verse, what we learn from it, it transcends that, right? There's a ladhin, and then it talks about the actual thing. الذين يظاهرون منكم من نسائهم ما هن أمهاتهم إن أمهاتهم إلا اللاتي ولدنهم. Those who make zihar, right? This thing which they used to do, right? And it's explained. Okay, so what is this? الذين يظاهرون منكم, because you're going to say, okay, then we need the hadiths to be able to know what this means. No, you don't, because it explains by negating it. It says ما هن أمهاتهم. They are not their mothers, right? And later it says, they are saying a munkar, a very bad thing from the of talk, and zura, right? And something which is falsehood, unjust, right? So obviously, vihar means what? To say to your wife, you're like my mother, right? Basically, I'm going to treat you like my mother, and you're sort of like haram for me in that kind of way, right? They say, no, it's not true, okay? Right? Those, their mothers, only those who gave birth to them. وَإِنَّهُمْ لَيَقُولُونَ مُنْكَرًا مِنَ الْقَوْلِ وَزُورًا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَعَفُوٌّ غَفُورٌ. Right? So again, we have, what would we gain by knowing who the woman was and who the man who did this was? We don't gain anything. Okay, we gain a bit of we fulfill some of our curiosity, right? But there's nothing gained. What the guidance we are meant to get from these verses, it's there, right? And the rest of our curiosities are not being entertained by God. It's like, you want to know these things, they're not important, okay? And the rest goes on that, right? والذين يظاهرون من نسائهم ثم يعودون لما قالوا فتحرير رقبة, and it gives sort of the to be able to expiate.
Yeah. Actually, I have like two final questions. So number one, the same surah, I brought it up on purpose because in this surah it's talking about this practice of the middle in the olden days where they used to do zihar. So like I did hear a tafsir of this surah where they were explaining that it was an oppressive practice, so the woman had to do everything for the man, but the man would not do anything for the woman, and that sort of thing. But when I'm reading these verses, like they're all about zihar. So like, how do we apply them to our understanding in the modern day now? Because this practice is not happening.
Yeah, I mean, well, what you're saying, I mean, this is one of the bad things about the tafsirs and the hadith is that they don't actually explain anything, and they actually obfuscate, right? They take it away. They actually make it less clear. So what you're saying here is that this practice of jihad was from what you read somewhere, right? that it was they made the woman do everything. All of that, that's not in the surah, right? It's not that they're making the woman do anything. None of that exists. What's the problem here? What's the problem that's been highlighted in the surah, right? The problem is that they're saying, right, إنهم ليقولون منكرا من القول. That it's speech, right? It's not that they made them do anything, or
Like
I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
the woman was fully obliged to serve her husband and do all the housework and stuff, but the husband wouldn't give his wife to do. That's what they were saying.
That's what they were saying. Well, I mean, again, maybe that's true, but what's being highlighted in this surah isn't that, right? What's being highlighted, of course, is the first of all. I mean, unless you want to say that the mother gets to do is made to do everything for the actual mother of the husband was in that same sort of situation where she would do everything. It makes no sense, right? الذين يظاهرون من نسائهم, they're saying you're like my mother, which means what? It's basically talking about how not having relations with them, right? Saying I'm not going to have relations with you anymore. You're like my mother to me, right? And the thing about that, it's a munkar qawl. It's munkar. It's an ugly thing to say, right? It's hurtful, very hurtful for the woman, right? And it's zura, right? It's falsehood. It's wrong, right? It's complete zur. So if you're saying, okay, how can we apply this to the modern setting, right? It's the same thing, right? What they've said, anything which a man can do this kind of situation to his wife, whereby he sort of removes that. He makes it as if you can't. He hurts her in this way and puts up this barrier and saying, "You are like my wife. You are like my sister." Something like this, right? Where he will no longer approach her as a man approaches his wife, and doing it by saying something which is a munkar and a zura, right? Even if it's not zihar, even if it's not saying you're like my mother, right? If it's doing it in a different way, then we can apply the same verse, right? The same thing applies because again, it's being put in this general way, right? The issue is it's a munkar and it's zur, and it's just something which is not true, right? Right, and you've making it like this kind of oath sort of thing. So the husband is being made to sort of like you know he's being made to see the gravity of this by having to free a slave before he's allowed to touch her again, right? Sort of like
And this,
putting his words sort of like in shoving them back down his throat almost, right? You want to do that, all right? Then if you're going to do that, then you have to free a slave, right? Or it says another one is I think it's in this one included. Oh, what happened? From an immediate or fast 2 months consecutively.
yeah.
Or if
Otherwise,
you
you feed the poor and stuff.
feed the
Then
poor,
that is
yeah,
like a kafara thing.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So it's given the point. It's given, and here take tilka hududullah. This is a had, right? Now, the hudud people talk about it sometimes as if it's the hudud are the punishments, right? The hudud aren't really the punishment. They're literally, saying these are limits, right? Don't cross these kind of things, right? So engaging in this kind of behavior, it's a limit, right? Crossing it means in this case you have these punishments. And it's an interesting thing
Okay.
what they say at the end of here. Look, وَلِلْكَافِرِينَ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Why kafirin? Kafirin, because again, kafir means ungrateful, right? So the person who's doing this kind of thing to his wife, he's being very ungrateful, right? Being very ungrateful. Mm.
And I was actually watching some YouTube. There was this channel. They were talking about like philosophical things. There is this surah in the Quran called Noon wal Qalami wa ma yasturun.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know, like, what is the Quranic Muslims interpretation of that? Because what they were saying is, again, they went back to a hadith. They said Allah created the pen first, and then He asked the pen write, and the pen wrote destiny. He said write destiny, the pen wrote destiny,
Mm.
and the universe. And then they said that the universe was the pot of ink for that pen.
Yeah.
But this is kind of like a
Fantastical.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean these are like fantastical sort of things. I mean they're not. I mean I don't take them seriously. The thing about them when it comes to these kind of verses, like Surah, like I said, Surah Noon, and these are clearly very mystical verses, right? They're meant to sort of, what's this? They're meant to sort of like open your mind up a bit, right? You're supposed to be able to start to see sort of more possibilities and gain a bit more insight through them, right? And when they're done in this kind of way, I think they're very related to the. I mean, the second verse for me tells me, for me, speaks to me about what it's about. So when it says, "Noon wal qalami wa ma yasturun, ma anta bi ni'mati rabbika bi majnun," the clearest thing there about it is noon, right? Now noon, the thing about it is there's this theory about the broken letters, right? The broken letters, because the Arabic language, the Arabic letters is related to Syriania, right? To Syriac and Aramaic, and the letters are basically sort of like each letter is developed from there. I mean, it's been shown that Arabic has developed from Nabatean, which developed from the Aramaic languages, right? In Aramaic, every letter has its own meaning, right? Every letter has its own
Okay.
meaning. In Arabic, every letter doesn't have its own meaning, but it was a brilliant insight by this young Saudi guy who said, "Look, the way to actually understand these letters is by looking at their meaning in the origin, in sort of like where they developed from. So if you look at the meaning of noon in Aramaic, what did it mean there? That's how you can get to understand what is being said here, right?" And one way, and another thing about when it comes to noon is sort of, they said it's related also to fish, right? And then noon, like Yunus, in the
Oh,
Quran it's called the noon, right? And of course, in the surah at the end of it, what is he? Who do we have? We have Yunus, right? In the same surah. At the end of the surah, it talks about this part of the ring structure of the Quran, where sometimes what's mentioned at the beginning is sort of referenced, or in the same way it's mirrored at the end. So at the end of the surah,
okay.
it talks about Yunus, Sahib al-Hud, right? Um,
Yes.
don't be like him, right? And so that references that. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, noon wal qalami wa ma yastur, by noon and the pen and what they write, it's, I mean, at first instance, it's going to be about the previous scriptures, what was written before. So it's sort of like referencing, by the way, think of Yunus, right? The prophet, who was a prophet. He was a prophet. He was a prophet, right? He's a
Yeah.
prophet, Yunus, and he almost ran away, right? He did actually run away. He ran away because people wouldn't listen to him in the first thing, right? He went away
Hmm.
angry, right? Noon, so it's sort of like telling you, okay, in your mind, you're sort of way clicking with that story. وَالْقَلَمِ وَمَا يَسْطُرُونَ, by the pen and all of that they've written in the previous scriptures, right? What about all of that? Well, they all show that مَا أَنْتَ بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ بِمَجْنُونَ, that you are not crazy. You, Muhammad, are not crazy. What you have here is what Yunus had before, right? What is in the previous scriptures being written about, you're receiving that now, right? You're not crazy,
Okay.
right? So to me it reads like that, right? And again, it shows you why these tafsirs and what they do is just it's crazy. They have no. It's like they're not reading what is there, getting in from what has any of that got to do, like what you mentioned before, right? That means that God created the pen, told the pen to write. What has that got to do with what comes right after, which says, "Ma anta bi ni'mati rabbika bi majnun," you are not crazy. This verse is supposed to be, it's consoling the prophet. It's one of the early surahs that was revealed, right? And it can be expected that he would think, okay, am I crazy, right? Because
Yeah.
he wouldn't have thought, okay, I'm going to be a prophet. He wasn't thinking about this at all, right? And then suddenly this happens. It's like, what, am I crazy? What is this, right? And so this verse is comforting him, right? Ma anta bi ni'mati rabbika, thou are not, by the blessing of your Lord, a man possessed. You're not crazy. You're not a madman, okay? And what helps him see that is Noon wal qalami wa ma yasturun. Right? This is part of it. It's part of what is being said. Right? How? Well, look at Yunus. Right? Look at what's been written before. Okay, you're coming in the same vein as a long line of prophets. Right? And if you're thinking about running away, right? I'm scared or something, right? Then remember Sahib and Noon. Remember, he ran away, right? He went, but then he came back, and of course, they believed, right? I mean, if you go to the end of the surah, like I said, we go right down to the last few verses. Here, right? Here we have this where it's talking about فَاصْبِرْ لِحُكْمِ رَبِّكَ. So be patient, right? Be patient and
Yeah.
don't be like Sahib al-Hud. Don't be like the companion of the fish. إِذْ نَادَى وَهُوَ مَكْظُومٌ. Okay, when he sort of called, when he called and he was sort of like in despair, right? So again, it's telling him don't be in despair. Like what was the first verses? You're not crazy. You're not mad. Don't be in despair, right? Don't be like Sahib al-Noon, right? Don't be like the companion of Noon, of the fish, right? When he called
Oh,
to his Lord, Makzoom, right? لولا أن تداركه نعمة من ربه لنبذ بالعراء وهو مذموم, and then it continues the story, right? A little bit about him, not the full story, it's just a bit of it, right?
okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I would say about that. So really, the tafsirs and these things, they do so much damage because once you have these kind of ideas in your mind, you can't see what's obvious, right? Once sort of like these fill your eyes, fill your mind a bit, it's not as easy to see what would be just a natural reading, right? Or you normally
Yeah.
naturally. I mean, I think everybody would be able to just get that, right? Everybody will be able to get that, Noon wal qalmi ma yasturun, right? It's comforting the Prophet by telling him, think of the previous revelations, right? By the pen and and what they write. Who are they? You know, all of these people who have written anything about prophethood, about messengers of the past, etc. Um,
Oh,
uh, they show that you are not crazy. They show that you are not crazy, and that's just the most natural thing. Instead, they tell you, um, you know, God created a pen, told it to write, and some big tablet in the sky. What has that got to do with any of this? Well, what's got to do with the second verse? Nothing.
yeah.
Right? Just, so
One,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, one last comment is that, like, I don't know if it's because I don't speak Arabic or because, like, I don't really understand the grammar of what it is. But I
Mm,
feel like when I'm reading the Quran, it's mostly like about hereafter. It's mostly like about punishments, warnings, those sort of things. But like, I'm really interested in listening to the Quran from the perspective where it would like talk and when one could highlight the social justice aspect of Islam, because
mm,
I see Muslims doing all sorts of like wrong things.
mm,
So and a lot of Muslims also harm each other.
mm,
So maybe this is worth another podcast, another live stream, and maybe it would tie very well back with the concept of Mujrimun that you discussed at the beginning of this live
mm,
stream.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we could do that. I mean, one of the things to remember, I mean, it sort of links with what you were saying before about, about verses which are, sort of like time bound, and obviously, about things which just happened in the Prophet's time, etc. One thing I think I did a stream where I talked about, I think I called it word count, right? One thing to remember is that the Quran, there's more of the Quran than we need, right? That the Quran, it didn't, God didn't have a word count, right? There was no word
Okay.
count limiting the Quran, right? So it wasn't like let me put all of the social justice stuff, all of the guidance that we need, all of these things, and that's it. Let's stop there, right, and not deal with anything else that's happening during the Prophet's lifetime, right? A lot of the Quran you can consider it to be almost extra, right? Because there's a lot of, I mean, there's so much of the Quran that like we know, for example, that a lot of it is repeats itself, repetitive in different ways. One of the sad things that we don't have is how the arguments in the Quran have progressed, because sort of like we have the black hole of sort of the Meccan period, right? Because what I think is that the arguments was being developed slowly throughout the years of the Meccan period, right? So, there was a period where the stories of the prophets were being told, right, to them, right? And then there was a period maybe where a lot of the verses were about, for example, like Surah Al-Nahl, right? And other surahs which are heavy on signs of nature, right? So then, so what's happening is there was an argument being developed. The conversation, it was a back and forth conversation that was happening between the Prophet and the people of Mecca, right? It wasn't just sort of like you've got this slab of surahs, Meccan surahs, and sort of like you can sprinkle them out in the Meccan period however you like. No, right? There was something, there was a development happening in how the surahs were being shown, were being sent down, right? Dealing with the arguments that were being presented by the Meccans, turning them to, trying to tackle them from a different angle, right? From one angle, it was from, by telling them to look at, like in Surah Al-An'am, right? Look at, all of the prohibitions you make, right? I mean, that surah is very heavy about how, the mushrikeen, they try to make this haram, this haram, this haram. The mushrikeen are the people who make things haram, right? And talking about how, you've invented all of these, these laws and rules. Okay, that's one way that the Quran was sort of like attacking them, attacking the da'wah, so to speak, right? And then from another angle, it was signs of nature, right? Look over here, look at this, and from another angle, it was stories of the prophets, right? From another angle, it was stories of prophets given in a different way. Okay, so it would have been really good if we had all of that, sort of laid out what was happening. But we don't have any of the dialogue really that was happening. We don't have any of that back and forth, right? The reason why we have the stories being repeated in the Quran is because they were part of an ongoing discourse, right? They were part of something that was happening, which has been lost, unfortunately, to history. We don't have it. Okay, but it was there was something going on there. I mean, a lot of the Meccan period, we don't know what was happening, right? People think that the Quraysh were just sitting there, sort of like being inert, not arguing back, not sort of like going through different phases. They were. It was a long period. It was 10 years. Think about it. It was a long time, right? 3 years of sort of like the secret dawah, and then 10 years of public preaching, right? And then you had the last period where they became very vicious towards him, and you have all of the then you have the sort of example of Ghafir, right, where they want to kill on Surah Yasin, those surahs where you can start to see the stories of people plotting to kill the messengers, kill the people who were warning, you had these. So you can see that was developing, right? And a lot was developing there. It's something which is important to understand. I mean, think of it this way: if the Prophet had lived for another 2 years or 3 years, more things would have happened and would have had more surahs sent down. Okay, does that mean that the Quran that we have now is incomplete? No, right? And so there was no word count of the Quran. One of the things is that it's we shouldn't think that God was there was sort of like so disinterested. Like what some of the people say, for example, why does the Quran have these surahs? I mean, why does it deal with personal matters of the Prophet or things which happened so at the time? Why does this? Why is this? Well, I mean, think of the reverse. I mean, there's a window of time where God is revealing verse, speaking to everybody, and he ignores them. He ignores these things and just only talks about universal truths and justice and these things, and that's it, right? It'll be a very cold way for God to sort of like interact through that in that time period, right? It'll be sort of very, very distant, right? Not close to the people of the time, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a very beautiful thing that we had that Allah is involved with the people of that time in that kind of way, right? Now that's been used to say, well, it's sort of like sort of demean the view of Allah from the Quran. I don't think it's demeaning at all. I mean, like the verse you just mentioned, the surah you mentioned, Surah Mujadila, right?
Yeah.
That's a very beautiful thing that Allah, is cares that much to talk about this woman who's complaining, right, and put that in the Quran. Imagine if he didn't. I'll be like sort of like very distant, right? But Allah, of course, there's transcendence in the Quran and there's immanence. There's both, right? And both to a full degree, right?
Okay.
So don't be too. I mean, there's so many verses which talk about the social justice and these sort of things. There's a lot, right? And there's a lot of verses, a lot of parts of the Quran which are involved, right, in the things of the time, right?
Yeah.
I saw one of the messages about that. I would suppose is that if the Quran was being revealed now, it would also be involved with us now, with the issues that we have now, which are the problems that we have now, right? With a woman's complaint to her husband now, right? Allah would speak about that now. If the Quran was being revealed now, and we would be happy for it, would be happy that he's, Allah has this attention to us now, right? We wouldn't want it the other way. I wouldn't want the Quran to be just filled, if it was being revealed now, to be just filled with only sort of like these transcendent, universal things, and sort of like almost ignoring us down here like ants or something, right?
Yes.
And and the Quran talks about it, says, إن الله لا يستحي أن يضرب مثلا ما بعوضة فما فوقها. God does not feel shy to talk about the mosquito and what is above it, right? From the highest to the lowest, right? Because God is with all of it. So don't be put off sort of by those things. I mean, in the way you think of it, if you were there, right, you would be happy that those things were in the Quran. That again, it's been it's involved in your life, right? And if it was being revealed now, you'd be happy for it to be involved in your life and all of these things which you think, okay, it's when you look at it back then, why do we need to know about that? Okay, maybe we don't need to know about what happened about this woman complaining about her husband, but it tells us something. It tells us something about God's care for the people then, and you should feel now that God has that same care for you here, right, in the present.
Yeah. Understood. All right. Well, this has been great. Thank you. And let me know if there are any offline halaqas, virtual but not on air, that I could join and probably learn more about the Quran.
I don't know. I'm thinking of doing something like that. And in the future, I'm still trying to get settled. I mean, I've moved nearby, but there was actually somebody who was a girl who actually comes onto the stream every once in a while. She is trying to set something up like that. So sort of also, I guess, watch this space. When I know of something like that, I'll definitely post about it or let people know. I'll put it in the community tabs and try to let you know about that. But send me an email as well every once in a while to follow up with that. Maybe I'll try to be a point where something like that could be made. But hopefully we can get something like that going. But yeah, I think it's I forget her name, Luba in Reddit. Shema, right? It was Shema, I think. And so she's trying to get something going like that, where it's a daily study session, Quranic study session, I'd say it's probably depending on how many people there are, because if it's going to be daily, you should always, put it that, let's say, around, I don't know, half or 80%, something like that. People will not be able to come every day. So you need a good amount of people, so to make sure that those who attend, that there's always somebody to attend if it's going to be daily. But if they
Yeah,
start off something like weekly or bi-weekly, I think that would be good. But I'll keep the community posted if I can about any developments in that. Okay.
great. Jazakallah khair. So I have to go
Fun.
now. Well,
Fun.
thank you.
Welcome. More than welcome. Take care. And inshallah, see you soon.
Bye. Inshallah.
Alaikum.
Assalamu
Alaikum assalam. Okay. There's a lot in the chat, which I'm not going to say, but let's bring on Sojo or Sajo. You'll have to let me know. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. Good to see you. Good to have you on now.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've been waiting a little bit, but it's okay.
Excellent. No, sorry about that, but you're okay?
No, it's okay. You learn a lot,
It's fine. So, what's your name? Sajo?
Yeah, it's like that. Sajo, it's okay.
Okay, brilliant. All right. You said you were from calling in from in Europe, right?
Yeah, Belgium.
Belgium, yes, that's it. I didn't know if you wanted me to say that or not.
Yeah, it's okay. I don't have FBI behind me. It's okay.
No problem.
So, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. I need to go to work tomorrow. So it's a little bit late, but it's okay.
Yeah, okay. Inshallah, next time I'll do a bit earlier. We'll try to get you on beforehand. But yeah, far away, so we don't keep you.
Are you in Europe?
No, Middle East.
Okay, so it's okay. I have a question. I have actually a multiple question.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm very interested in the hereafter. I don't seem to find a lot in the Quran about the hereafter. When you die, what happens? It's just a barzakh. But what is the definition of a barzakh? Do we see our family there, or is it a different kind of world, a different kind of dimension? I'm not really clear about it.
Yeah.
I would really love to hear your opinion about it.
Yeah, I mean the thing about it, there's a very big difference between sort of the traditional view of after you die and what we have in Quran, right? So, for example, the whole concept of punishment in the grave, that's non-existent in the Quran, right? That's nowhere to be found. And this idea that this time period between when you die and judgment day, that time period, that where you are, you go to this place called barzakh, that also doesn't appear in the Quran. Barzakh just means a barrier, right? The verse which talks about barzakh, it doesn't speak about it as if it's a place where people go, right? That there are people in the barzakh. No, the barzakh is not a place; it's just a barrier, right?
Yes.
The closest thing that I can see when it comes to, I mean, I'm very into NDEs. I don't know if you look into near-death experiences and these sort of stuff.
I've seen a lot of videos because of you.
Because
of the end game, God's end game, God's
good
plan. Because of that video, I listened too much about it.
Well, they're very, very interesting. I mean, if you can get a hold of some of the work of DOPS, of the Department of Perceptual Studies of the University of Virginia, they do a lot of work, publish a lot of work on that. But in a lot of these accounts, you have literally what comes up to be a barzakh, where the person who's experiences NDE will come to a point where they know that if they go past that, they won't be able to come back, right? Either that's said to them clearly, explicitly, or they sense it, or they just know that if they go past this point, they won't be able to return. And that's literally that's basically what's been said in those verses about barzakh, right? وَمِنْ وَرَائِهِمْ بَرْزَخٌ إِلَى يَوْمِ يُبْعَثُونَ, right? That they can't go back. What does that mean? Go back until the day they are resurrected. What does that mean? It means they can't go back to their bodies, right? So having the barzakh behind you, that's what the verse says. مِنْ وَرَائِهِمْ بَرْزَخٌ, behind them is this barzakh, this barrier, and that barrier will be there until the day that they are resurrected. And what will happen then? That barzakh will be gone, so they can go back to their bodies and be resurrected. Right?
Yeah.
That's all barzakh is, I think, to me. In terms of, what happens, when we die. So I think there's a very big difference between, depending on how, how righteous or how not the person was. So, the Quran speaks about essentially who are the kuffar, sort of waking up on Judgment Day and not realizing, right? Not knowing, right? But then it talks about those who have been, who have died as shuhada, which is more than the martyr. Okay, that they are alive with their Lord, receiving sustenance, right? So I think there's a big spectrum between people when it comes to the time period after you die, right? There's a some people have some souls sort of like have that who gave their sort of their life as witnesses for God, that they are given a life in exchange for that they get to live with that a bit. I'm not convinced that they have sort of like they can just like some of the Sufis say that they can just move around, come down to the world and see what's happening and do all of that. I'm not convinced of that. I think they it's the verse says عند ربهم يرزقون, with their Lord receiving sustenance, right? They're sort of like separate from this world now.
Of course.
So I'd say that about that. That's in a general way, but for the most part, we don't know what's happening. It's left very ambiguous. I think even the time before we come to this world, right? That's left very, very ambiguous. We don't know all of the details. And
but I've seen a lot of NDEs, like you said, they talk about how we chose to be here. We, it all it's all in the Quran. It all goes. It's crazy to think about it because I don't know. I feel like it's something special.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is crazy to think about it. I mean, especially if you have, don't know if you have kids or if not. I mean, just to think of the idea that that your kids sort of chose to be with you, right? If you look at some of those NDE examples as well, that people get to sort of like choose who as spirits who to go down to, which sort of like who they want for their parents, which body to inhabit. And understanding things that way, it solves a lot of those problems that people bring up, about somebody who was born disabled or was born this, or that no, it's not that people are just being put sort of unilaterally by God into this situation or that situation, but we have a hand in choosing that. So I'm fairly convinced about that. I mean, it's not something which is you can take from the Quran, other than from the aspect that God is going to be just, right? And that God is just. So from that aspect, it makes sense, but there's no actual details, given to us in this sort of way, right? Same thing with the what I've mentioned before about being reincarnated, right? So like this kind of limited reincarnation, which I've presented about, which is it's just that every soul, every person must go through this test, and it's very clear where they will be, right? And so somebody who is murdered beforehand or dies before they have sort of like completed enough of this life's test, they get to be reincarnated again.
Yeah, but I what I wanted to ask you, but I'm gonna think. Yeah, it's crazy to think about it because you open my mind about a lot of stuff. So I really think about it. I really think about that a lot. I don't know why. I'm still young, but it's like I can't wait to see what's behind it. You understand?
Yeah.
It's crazy because I'm actually looking forward to see it. Because Allah Subhanahu wa Taala he gives a haq. He's it's true to his word. So I really want to see, but I don't. In the traditional way, I hear a lot of things. It's crazy because sirat, punishment in the grave. Then you have to go to this place, then to this place. It's
like run and run to get your papers, huh?
yeah,
In a
yeah.
third world country.
Yeah, like we didn't pass the test. So God is still not. It's crazy. And the punishment in the grave, I really don't understand it because it's like you
Yeah,
said,
no,
the soul, it don't come to the body yet.
yeah,
It's
it makes
crazy.
no sense in terms of just that. No just judge punishes you before judging you, right?
Yes,
I
yeah.
mean, judgment day has to come first before
Of
before
course,
punishment.
before
Yeah,
you get punished, before you get torn apart, it's
yeah,
crazy. I really think
yeah.
about it a lot, because I really want to know.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
What's that saying from Peter Pan? What to die would be a great adventure. Huh?
Yeah.
That's how
To
you're
see,
thinking.
it's crazy because I don't, it, I don't know. It's just I don't know.
Well,
I
when it comes to what you're mentioning there, and with the, maybe it comes from the NDEs and watching them, because a lot of people mention that first of all, the people who experience NDEs, their fear of death goes away completely. They don't want to die, of course, but their fear of death just completely goes away. And by proxy, this happens to people who listen to a lot of those accounts as well, and speak to people who have had those experiences and be around them. They start to lose their fear of death as well, because I guess why would that be the case? Sometimes I think it's because instinctively we recognize a lot of truth in that, and so it consoles people in a much more deeper way than they usually would. So unlike, for example, hearing, being told about, when you die, everything is peace. You go to oblivion and that's fine. Like how an atheist would think. An atheist would think, okay, you die and then it's oblivion and nothing happens. That's never consoled anybody. That's never taken away anybody's fear of death, right? I don't think anybody who's absorbed that kind of thinking, right, has had their fear of death gone away, right? But instinctively, people who listen to these kind of NDE accounts, they have their fear of death just goes a long way to disappearing, if not completely. No,
yeah,
interesting thing.
but
Another thing I talked about once is about, because you're asking about the hereafter and stuff. I think that there's a gradation of how alive people are as well, right? So when it comes to in one of the streams I talked about, one of the earliest ones, I think, that's how the people in hell are being mentioned in the Quran as being sort of like almost dead, right? Like
mm,
لا يموت فيها ولا يحيا. It's like they're in between life and death, right?
yes,
So they're not really alive, right? They're not like us now. Here we're alive, but the people who are
mm,
in hell, they're in between life and death. And I take that to mean not just that. It's not just about. It's not talking about punishment, right? Somebody who's been like punished and is in a lot of pain, they can feel very alive during that pain because they get a lot of stimulation, so they feel a lot,
mm,
very very alive, right? But I think also it means that they're literally less alive. That there's less of a life factor in the people in hell than us here right now. And in the same way, there's a verse which talks about how people in the life of the hereafter, that is the true life. Lahiya al-hayawan, right? And it's given in that very emphatic, hayawan, very emphatic form. Like they're really alive. What I take that to mean that in comparison to here, and again, the NDEs say the same thing, that in comparison to what they experienced over there, they were alive, and this feels like a dream, right? Here, it's like we're not really alive. So I think there's this kind of gradation as well, that you have the people at the bottom, the lowest part of hell. They are barely alive, maybe closer to stones than anything, going almost to Ibn Arabi, who says that the people in hell will eventually become like inanimate objects, right? So they will be in hell forever, but not feel anything because they're basically hardly alive anyway, right? And then, you get, and yeah, I think that's also what, almost unrelated, but I think it also comes down to the idea of slaughtering, right? That's why, why is it that we don't need to slaughter fish, for example, right? I think fish are on a sort of in terms of scale of how much alive they are, and they are less so than, for example, a mammal, right? Or, a sheep. These, trees are less alive than fish, right? And you go all the way down. So the things, there's a sort of like life force to things, how much is something alive. And in the hereafter will be that as to our full potential, whereas here we're sort of like semi-alive.
It's like it's crazy because our life is so fast. It goes so fast,
Yeah. I mean,
it's crazy to think about it, but I'm still scared of the death, because I don't know where I'm going to, if I'm good, if I was good, if I was not good. You understand? Because it's after you can't come back. It's like it's crazy to think about it, because I really want to be good. We really try our best to be good, but you never know. You understand? Maybe you hurt somebody, maybe before, maybe you.
Yeah, I mean,
You said,
to be honest, I've begun to see a lot of that as fear mongering, almost, right? I don't know where I'm going to be. I know where I'm going to be. What have I done?
Yeah, but like
because
I said,
look,
it's
it comes.
crazy to think about it, because people you see, you hear, you.
Yeah, I mean, the trepidation is there out of awe for God, right? Like the fear for these people will be out of fear of God, out of just the way you would fear something which is just awe-inspiring, right? But in terms of being afraid of where I'm going to end up, and I don't fear that as much anymore, because look, I've never done any of the, alhamdulillah, I've never done any of the major sins. Have I killed anybody? No. Have I done? No, right? And, Allah said, that if you stay away from all of the major sins, just the major sins, right? Everything else is forgiven, right? Everything else is forgiven.
Yeah,
إن
subhanallah,
تجتنبوا
but
كبائر ما تنهون عنه نكفر عنكم سيئاتكم وندخلكم مدخلا كريما, right? Stay, don't murder, don't cheat anybody, don't despoil an orphan from their wealth, don't testify falsely, don't do these sort of things, don't do these major crimes, don't commit zina, don't steal, don't do any of the big sins, and you're fine.
yeah, of course. Yeah. You're right, but when you talked about you doing ibadah to taghut, it's really shirk. When you talk about shirk, it's really, it opened my mind too much. So I'm afraid about everything in shirk. I see everything in shirk. I try to stay away from that as
Yeah.
humanly possible. You understand?
Yeah, no, yeah. Be careful of that as well, because I've seen people that, especially in the Quranist community, there's a what I I made a post on Reddit called shirk fanaticism, where
Yeah,
people start to see shirk in everything. This
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah,
shirk, that is shirk, 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 shirk. No,
yeah. But
shirk isn't that it isn't that difficult to spot, right? I
okay,
mean, I don't think it's the thing. It's you're talking about real bad and servitude and deference and you know being like a slave to somebody, right?
yeah, yeah,
And being that way in something which God does not approve of, right? Um,
yeah. So you are
so
knowingly going in the ibadah
yeah, yeah,
to
yeah. You
somebody
have to.
else.
I mean, I don't think. I think that there are people who are in shirk. They don't know they're in shirk because they don't understand what shirk is, right?
Yes.
That's the only reason why. They think
Okay.
shirk is bowing to an idol and doing this. It's part of the tahrif which happens, right?
Yes.
Even in the Prophet's time, it was happening. يحرفون الكلمة عن مواضعه. They do tahrif of these words away from their meanings, right? Shirk is to worship the Lat and Uzza and Hubal, and that's it, and then that's how they think about it. Yeah, but in terms that if they understood what shirk was, right, they would recognize it in themselves immediately, right? Um, some of them would even say it out. We are servants to the Sahaba or to this or that.
Mm-hmm.
And they have it that way. What they tell us, what this person tells us is haram, it's haram. What this person tells us halal, it's halal. Okay, then this is basically
SubhanAllah.
what we're saying. Yeah. Um,
It's like I'm hearing hadith. It's like I'm
mm,
hearing a lot of things.
mm, mm.
I I'm really afraid about that. It's scaring me because
Mm.
maybe I'm doing it without my knowledge. But
Well, I mean, also don't. I mean, there's another thing, a very interesting verse about um, about the youth, right? And
yes,
I did a stream about that as well. That is it going to be the case that there's going to be young people go to hell basically, because there's a verse which talks about how the condemned complain to Allah, and Allah says to them, "Did we not give you life enough so that the one who can know?" فيتذكر من تذكر. That didn't we give you life enough? And sort of the implication of that is that those who don't live a long enough life, right? They have an excuse before Allah, right? Um,
yes,
so I mean, there's God is patient, right? It's not expecting a 20-year-old to have everything right, or a 25-year-old, or a 30-year-old, right? When you start to get around 40, then you need to make sure, sort of like but that you have your head on straight, okay? But I, there's unfortunately I sense a lot of frantic rushing, right, from young people now, that they want to have, they're so worried about being on guidance, right?
yes,
That it just makes them not able to settle, and too frantic and too worried about getting something wrong and not knowing who to trust and what should I do, and then they lose their minds because they can't they lose the ability to think about something for themselves because they're constantly listening to so many people, right?
mm,
And this person convinces them, then this person convinces them something else, and this person, and then they get confused, right? Because they're being too frantic,
of
and
course,
and then it's a natural thing, I suppose. If somebody who's like 16, 17, they're just starting to sort of like learn about their deen, trying to become more religious, and and then that happens to them, and I imagine Allah's looking at this person, just being patient with them, right? Take your time, it's fine. Let this guy sort of run around for a while, blow off with some steam, and um, I think that's a very big thing, overlooked part of how people see Allah. That He is patient, right? Patient
of course.
to let you find your way,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
without,
of course.
without, without holding it against you when you were sort of younger and confused and not knowing what's what.
Of course. But nowadays, I see a lot of youth, a lot of young people are really listening too much to TikTok shakes. You know,
Yeah.
they don't accept when you say something about life, about you understand, because I'm 33 years old. I understand a little bit more than you understand. But they
Yeah.
don't accept it. They really. But then I say,
Yeah,
okay.
because the issue is that there were others who were that hard-hearted, and they're now 50 years old, and they haven't they've passed that that situation, and they never sort of wised up, but they are looking to them as they are, as if those people are wise, right? So looking at the scholars, the older scholars, what do you know? Yes, you might be more older than I am, but this sheikh is older than you,
Yeah, but
right?
it's a crazy game because
Yeah, yeah.
they go into extremes. I have a lot of family members who are young, but they go too much in the extreme. You understand? They
Yeah,
don't.
yeah.
They can't differentiate
Hmm.
between the normal, acceptance.
Yeah.
Don't go too much in the extreme, because Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, He don't like extreme. He
Hmm.
don't like to be arrogant. To be,
Hmm.
you need to be. It's crazy world that we live now.
Hmm.
You see,
Hmm.
I come from akhira to extreme, but I really, really, really want to know. But yeah. I'm looking too much at NDEs, too much at
Hmm.
everything.
Hmm.
I really want to know about akhira.
Hmm.
About
Hmm.
what will happen.
Yeah.
I will,
Yeah.
I will, I want to know about that. I'm not.
Hmm.
This world is nothing new to me. I've
Hmm.
seen too much. I
Hmm.
get.
Well, if you come up with any insights, be sure to pop in and share them with us as well.
Yeah, but it's a dead end, because I'm only for I'm looking in the Quran, and I don't see much. So
Hmm.
I don't want to take about hadith, too
Hmm.
much.
Hmm. Yeah.
Too much. It's too much for my intellect to accept it.
Hmm. 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 Hmm.
But thank you very much. It was a good talk. Thank you very much.
No problem, no problem. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for coming. And yeah, make
Yes,
sure you come on another time.
of course, I will be there when you are ready. Thank you
Okay,
very much.
no problem.
Salam alaikum,
Okay.
my friend. Good
Wa
night.
alaikum good night. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. All right. If there's anything in the chat which I've missed, because there's a lot in there now, if there's something that anybody wants me to address quickly, just copy and paste it again down below. Otherwise, I don't have anybody else backstage. Let me try to see if there's anything. Using fancy words along with man's people. What was that? What was that, Adriana? I know this was almost for my head, right? Yes, using fancy words to misguide people. Yes. لغو الحديث. Alright, there's a conversation in another language going on here. Nice. Noon means seed. No, not seed. fish. It's related to fish. I mean, I'm not sure exactly. I haven't looked at the broken letters, taking that back to what it means in Aramaic, but it's going to be related to what it means in Aramaic. So I think it's related to fish. I mean, it's called that. I mean, there's another verse in the Quran which says the noon calls Yunus the noon, the possessor of noon, or the companion of noon, right? Which means fish, right? In that thing. Means the spine. Aleph means the spine that holds the whole body. It means uprightness. Cool. Let me just read that first. Quran and the Just Society by Roman Harvey. I know him. I've seen him on Twitter. Roman Harvey deals with the social justice aspect of the Quran. Yeah, I mean, there's a very nice book by. It's a Shia book, but it's called Al-Adl al-Ilahi, the Divine Justice, by Al-Mutahhari. It was recommended to me by Hassan al-Maliki, and it's a fantastic book which talks about divine justice. There's another one. I wonder if this book uses him, because he probably does. It's a very pretty famous work. At the beginning, you were talking about Ahlul Bayt would not separate from the Quran, or the Ahlul Bayt angels. Why are you so much in love with Ali, the Ahlul Bayt who drink alcohol? So no, the Ghadir hadith, that's what I was talking about in the beginning. It really says the Itra from Ahlul Bayt. So Itra are the blood relatives of the Prophet at the time. So basically, Ali, Hassan, Fatima, and Ali, Hassan, Hussein, and Fatima. And it's a prophecy. I mean, if you don't want to accept it, you don't have to accept it. Like I said many times, the Quran is more than enough. You don't need, Ali or the Ahlul Bayt or any of that. But you have to be fair to the history if you know it, right? And when you look at the history, you find that prophecy bore out true, even if you don't have the prophecy, right? You find that Ali, Hassan, Hussein, Fatima, they never deviated from the Quran, even when everybody else did, right? When everybody else went one way, they remained steadfast with the Quran. And same thing with Ali. I mean, Ali saved any concept of the Sahaba for me, right? So once you start to actually look into the Sahaba, like growing up as a Sunni, of course, you have this vaulted opinion of the Sahaba, right? I used to have a lot of love for Abu Bakr, for example, right? But once you actually start to read and look and see, how they behaved and how they acted properly, critically, you find that sort of like the reverence we have for them, they fall down one by one. They fall down more and more. Not all of them completely, but definitely gets taken down quite notches. And each time you just see Ali being absolutely above board, head and shoulders of everybody else. And in the end, it made me very happy for the sake of the Prophet, right? That the man who he raised ended up being a man like Ali, right? For me personally, it fills me with a lot of joy for the sake of the Prophet, right? And then you think to yourself, face palm, of course. Who else is it going to be? Who else will be at such a high level of virtue, other than the person who was raised by the Prophet from childhood, right? And who himself was devoted to him, right? So it wasn't just one way, right? Ali was completely devoted to the Prophet. And then when you reread a lot of the seerah, you start to notice things which you never noticed before, which is sort of like Ali always sort of in the background, right? Always on the Prophet at the Prophet's side, right? Always the one being turned to, which you don't notice as much until you actually, because a lot of the the seerah was written in the end for the Umayyads. The seerah that we have, Ibn Ishaq, who was written for the Umayyads in the end, right? The very first seerah that was actually written by the son of Uthman ibn Affan, and it had a lot of praise for Ansar in it. And the Caliph at the time said, "No, I don't like this. It's got too much praise for Ansar." So he redid it without as much praise for the Ansar. That seerah isn't around, but what we have instead is the seerah which was written for the caliphs, which ultimately comes from who? It comes from Urwa, Zuhri, Ibn Ishaq, right? All of these were Umayyad people, and yet despite that, you still can see Ali being involved in ways which you don't expect when you just sort of reading the seerah normally. What's this? Who means to be impure and concealed. Yeah, I mean, in the end, I think it does mean to be crazy as well. Is Joe Arabic? I don't think he was Arabic. It says, damn, 9 years you on this Qur'an talks. 9 years. You talk about the YouTube channel. Yeah, the YouTube channel has been, I don't know how long have I had this YouTube channel for now. Is it 9 years? Oh. But no, these live streams, if you're talking about that, we're saying these Quran talks, these live streams, I've been doing them now for how long now? It's been a year and a bit. We're coming up to 100, which is mind-blowing for me, right? I mean, this is live stream number 96, Caravan of Contemplation, as I termed it, and 4 more, it's going to be 100, which is crazy. Yed means power in Arabic. Yes, can be. Here we have something. Yeah, Khalid, can you speak about the difference between the Sharia and Manhaj? What does that mean exactly? I haven't looked into that much. Like, he's talking about that verse. Minhaj, if I was to take a stab at it now, Shira would be more about sort of like the law, right? Sort of the laws. Minhaj would be sort of like a way of sort of like implementing them or the ethics. You could even talk about these two being sort of like the two sides of law and spirituality, right? That there's a spirituality that we've been given, and a spirituality which has been given to other peoples, right? It's not the same, right? Laws have been given to us and laws have been given to other people. Each have been given, and we have to race towards goodness. The Quran will become truly clear when you understand the language. I think it's overdone, the idea about the language. Part of the Quran being easy is that its language is easy. If you answered, you would yap hard. If you answered you would yap hard. Why would I yap here hard? What did he say? I don't get that. And some nahu, some grammar. Can you find the origin or root of the words yet? And again, that's another thing which I don't like, that and what I've called the people of roots. They think that the whole Quran can be just brought down to roots and roots. That it's sort of like this kind of this magic key that unlocks the Quran, which without it you will never be able to unlock the Quran if you don't understand the roots. No, again, that's making the Quran to be more difficult than it is. Alright, I'm not going to go through too much more. Let me go down a bit more. You just do not get the language. I don't know what you're talking about here. Oh, you're talking to Stajos. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, there you have it. See, yes, the Quran can be put down to roots. Yeah, I mean, I think it's been overplayed by some. The whole idea, roots, and that's what happened. I think one of the things which happened with Quran centric, right? Quran centric, Joseph Yasin, right? Unfortunately, I lost his contact when I lost my Telegram, but he was very much into this, where it was all just about roots, and trying to interpret the whole Quran by just looking at roots. And the language is simple. The Quran, Allah did not make the Quran difficult where you had to sort of like look in roots. And when people look in roots, they keep on coming up with different ideas. It just makes it more difficult. Can you please expand on the concept of one of the qualities of the Quran being to increase people in vice and wrongness? So this is sort of like in terms of giving people enough rope to sort of to hang themselves with, right? And also by it's sort of like how having something which is good pulling at you, it measures out the full extent of your resistance, right? So when you have something which is pulling at you in one direction, right, it can show how resistant you are, right, by that pulling, right, by you going the other way, right, by going the other way from it. So by going the other way, it's showing the full extent of that, right? And there are some people. It's sort of like how, what's his name? That Dawah guy, Ali Dawah, right? Ali Dawah, where he's started going about how he's, yes, we're proud of it, and somebody made a funny video, a song about that. We're proud of it. We're proud of the what's it called? I think it was the marriage to Aisha age, right? Or the apostasy law, one or the other, right? Say yes, we will. I think it was apostasy. So yes, we will kill you for apostasy, and we're proud of it. Well, that's exactly. See, that's measuring out the full extent, right? It's increasing in wickedness, right? Because it's pulling the other way. Sharia halal pimp, huh? What are your words? But maybe this is something which I'll try to do a stream about, because it is aspect of the Quran which people don't give enough for, because Quran knows it's part of this world's test as well, right? It's involved. It helps to sieve people out as well. لا يزيد الظالمين إلا خسارة, right? Yeah, that was it. Yes, thank you, perfect Dawah. And yes, I got your message. Inshallah, next Saturday I'll come on your live stream. Yeah, he said exactly what he said. He's proud of killing apostates. Yeah, I mean, There you go. Right. When somebody, when there's a force of goodness in the world, right? It more clearly defines its opposites, right? By resistance to it, right? It shows the depths of how they are. Some of the Sahaba, some of the early companions, people who became a Muslim. They used to be very close to some of the mushrikeen, right? I think it was Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, who was one of the early Muslims. He was very close to Abu Jahl. They were friends, right? And so, and Abu Jahl was called Abu al-Hakam. He was called, he was known as somebody who was wise and just or whatever, right? But by having that, the revelation come, it polarized people, right? It polarizes them, right? One side gets brought into its orbit, and the other one resists completely, right? The other way around. In the same way, how the what's it called, shaitan, right? When commanded to do sajda, right? What did that do? That polarized, right? The malaika did sujood, and the other one, and shaitan increased in kufr, right? He said, no, I'm not going to, right? It brought out what was in him. Garrett, our Rivia, bring you on quickly. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam. How are you?
I've really enjoyed this live stream and the entire series as well, to be honest, to preface.
Yeah, well, welcome. I'm glad to see you.
I think I can speak on behalf of many people when I said it really benefited, but certainly me, in terms of, I suppose, thinking of the Qur'an in a more sort of holistic framework. So I'd like to say Jazakallah khair for that first and foremost.
Afwan, Jazakallah. Thank you guys for coming and tuning in.
Afwan. I had a sort of really random question, but something I've been thinking of, perhaps quite abstract, for quite a long time, and I was wondering if, not if there's necessarily any sort of Qur'anic answer condensed for this, but just sort of if you had any insights or if you've thought about this yourself. I have often felt like the vast majority of mankind fall into this kind of limbo between being not really sort of evil enough and not sort of black-hearted enough for the torments of hell, but never quite also reaching the sort of virtue that one ought to aspire to attain in this life in order to be worthy of entering heaven. And I've always thought it's perhaps the greatest tragedy of man that most of us fall into this kind of grey space of mediocrity. And this, I know I've certainly felt at many points in my life that I myself am not doing enough, and that I'm not bringing enough forward, as it says in Surah Al-Fajr, bringing enough forward in order to enter the garden. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts regarding this.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate to having those thoughts and of those of it. I mean, Quran does mention, like for example, the verse about minhum sabiqun bil khairat bi'idhnillah, right? Minhum muqtasid, minhum zalimun nafsi, and of those who are unjust to themselves. And there are those who are sort of like muqtasid, sort of like in the middle, and then those who are sort of like racing forward, right? In terms of like a thing, I mean, I'm not sure when it comes to, I mean, what is it really to deserve paradise? But I think it comes down to, some of it comes down to what is the future for mankind, right? So I mean, I tried to give some thoughts about that in the my God's Endgame video. But
Brilliant.
what is the future for us in that? I mean, it's not, the thing about it is we're not being tested when it comes to being tested here. It isn't, we're not being tested for Jannah or for hell. All right. I think we're being tested for other than that, right? So Jannah, these are blessings. It's a blessing. It's going to be a home for later. But in terms of making it through this world's test, I mean, just like I said, I've said many times, the baseline of just not committing any of the major sins, that's enough to get you into Jannah, right? Just not committing any of the major sins. So you don't have to do a lot of virtue. You don't have to think, and that part of that comes from what this world is, right? The tests of this world, and the temptations of this world, and the difficulties of this world, and going through life, to
Yes.
go through life without committing these major sins. And even if you do, to actually repent from them, with real remorse and rectify them, and actually do a proper tawbah from them, right? That in itself, I think it's a big achievement, and to do it in this world where we're veiled from Allah, we're veiled from things, and all these pulls of different sort of idols and aliha trying to pull you in different ways, to be able to remain true to our humanity, to basically return to Allah as what He created, right? In the end, Allah didn't, Allah created what He wanted, right? When He created a human being, He didn't say, "I'm going to create something, and I want it to become something else." Right? He created what He wanted from the get-go. And if you can just get through this world sort of surviving intact, right? That's sort of that's making it through this world, right? Without corrupting our humanity. So maybe that's what it comes down to. That what we look at right now as mediocrity is good enough in terms of just the taqwa of not falling into the major sins, because maybe later we will be put into positions where we have to be able to not fall into these kind of temptations or these kind of sins, and not do anything, not mess something up, basically.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I would say with that. But I definitely understand what you're saying. And the other thing I think sometimes is, how much do we know in terms of, because we look at and we see mediocrity. We look at to be mediocrity all around us. But of course, we don't really know that. I mean, we don't see external flashy signs of virtue, but just the constant virtues that people have to do throughout their life. They can be much more sort of sturdy, I think, than any great virtues that people might do. Maybe even so much so that they become just second nature to them. They're not even something which they have to do any effort for them, right? So
That's
those virtues, the virtues that you end up doing all your life, where it doesn't take any effort, and you don't even realize it, maybe they're the best kind of virtues, because the virtues that you have to make effort to do, the reason why you have to make effort to do them is because they're not as natural to you, right? I mean, I'd think of it this way, in a way, right?
Yeah.
I have to put an effort to do this. It means it's not as easy, right? Whereas if it's something which you sort of do naturally, like breathing, you don't even think about it, don't even think about it as a virtue, that's almost a part of you, right? And so I think sometimes a lot of people just are in that kind of space. They get on through life being polite and kind to people. They don't they're not abusive. If they the daily grind at work where there's somebody annoying and they don't get angry at them, and you see and sort of you appreciate this more when it's not there. So when you're finding somebody who doesn't have these normal everyday virtues, right, where they're not polite, then they always want to rude, they're always going to be sarcastic towards you, always looking for some way to sort of put you down or this or that, then you sort of notice them even more, right? You notice that these people have the mediocrity virtues, sometimes maybe the best. Who knows?
That's a really good point, really profound. It reminded me, it drew homage sort of to, I remember Sam Guerin's in a video a while ago, talking about a sort of an article when he had visited Cornwall, which is I mean, to this day, still a much sort of quieter, more laid back area of and he was talking about remembering reading a story in the Cornish Times about a woman who had sort of passed away, lived a very long life. What one would very boring, very mediocre, right? You know, she had worked at a post office. You know, started a family. She was a regular contributor at her church, and you know, was sort of loved and appreciated by friends and family. And he I remember him saying that to an outsider, because of how much, I suppose, celebrity culture for one, and this, I guess, kind of expectation that we always need to be. We need to sort of make a name for ourselves and be in some sort of limelight because of the effects that these things have had upon us. We fail to recognize what true virtue is, and what a successful and fulfilling life might be very mundane looking on the outside, but in reality, if you look at it in a deeper sort of perspective, you find that it's the kind of life that would absolutely guarantee someone a place in Jannah, just because they were perhaps most attuned in with their fitrah, with aligning themselves to what God has asked from us. As I remember you mentioning in your, I believe it was the video on our inherited Islam versus God's Islam, the Islam of Allah, with the senses being used to our full capacity. You know, as you said a couple of minutes ago, just being, you know, we were created as insan. Yeah, I need to live as human beings on this planet and not to be something else. For even just becoming the fullest versions of ourselves and fully, I guess, attaining this kind of eudaimonia with the sight, hearing, heart, and aql complex. Maybe it was soul, I can't remember. But the sort of the four complex, using your senses to their full capacity, and just being the fullest version of yourself, so that, you know, as you mentioned in that video. Sorry, I know I'm waffling right now, but as you mentioned in that video, sort of using one's sight in the best way possible in order to attain fuller sight and become therefore a full human being, a fuller version of what God had always intended you to be. So actually, I found the explanation really profound in that regard.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's a very good example that you gave of that Cornwall woman, huh? But yeah, I mean, it is. I think it is. It does come down to that. I think it does come down to that, because yes, there's this space for the very virtuous, but there's also space for the sort of like the normal quiet virtue. Yeah, I think, and you know, like I said, most of them probably fall under that. You know, again, you have sort of the waqia, right? ثُلَّةٌ مِنَ الْأَوَّلِينَ وَثُلَّةٌ مِنَ الْآخِرِينَ, right? When it talks about the ashab al-yamin, whereas when it talks about what السابقون السابقون, right? أولئك المقربون. Then you have, you know, more exclusivity there, right? Those people who always rush there and always there first. But you know, and it also just we have that big spectrum of people, right? I mean, I was mentioning to somebody, I think it was before yesterday, you know, there are some people who will, like, even now you have people who still, you know, they ask questions about, you know, how come nobody has said this before? Why haven't any of these scholars said this before? Why? And, you know, again, it's part of the world's test, right? There are some people who will never be first, right?
Yeah.
Who if they just won't be the first people to think, and to see and accept the truth, right? And you know, no matter what, right? They have to see somebody else going before them, before they have the confidence, you know, in themselves and in truth to be able to follow it, right? And then there are some people who will never be first, but they will be second, right? And then there are some people who will never be second, but they'll be third, right? And you have this whole spectrum, right? And until you have people who will not join the cause of truth, until the majority of the other people do, right? So it pegs us. This world will peg us along this very big spectrum. So even though you can say there's a swath of a majority mediocrity in the middle, but even that, of course, is a big spectrum, right? So you have all along a vast amount within that, those closer to among the first, and those more towards the back.
Absolutely, yeah. And so the spectrum is very much it's varied in a kind of hidden way in which you would never sort of be able to tell about an individual. But obviously you have, as you mentioned, I guess you could say leaders. يعني مثل وفي ذلك فليتنافس المتنافسون, that you have the competitors in the races sort of leading the rest of us, if you will, but everyone, like the sort of the vast majority of mankind being within that what seems to be mediocrity, but actually different stages of virtue that perhaps much of it would remain unnoticed to someone, to sort of a general onlooker. But that's very profound, actually. I think you've definitely helped shed some light on this issue. Well, yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. I'm gonna have to actually call it evening now. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Inshallah.
Yes, please do.
Brilliant. Allah
يوفقك. الله يبارك فيك. السلام عليكم.
مع السلامة.
All right. So I think we'll call it an evening. Thank everybody for coming on, and I'll try to do these. I don't know, every 15 or something live streams, or every 10. Make one one of these kind of sessions, just to give people more opportunity to come on. But for now, جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.